Recording in progress. That means we are about to get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Wednesday evening. While we wait to officially get the ball rolling, say hello, jump in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from. We always love to see the spread. Like I said, we'll give everyone a minute or two to sign on here, get comfortable, get ready. For today's talk, we are discussing the panorama of the city of New York and a new book about it that just came out in conjunction with the 60th anniversary of the 1964 World's Fair, which is very exciting. We have Lynn Maliszewski with us from the Queen's Museum, and we'll say hello to her in just a few minutes. I'm also curious to know, while you're saying hello in the chat, if you have ever visited the Panorama or if it's on your to-do list still. So let us know. All right, let's see. Hello, Al from Wayne, New Jersey, Will from Brooklyn, Robin from the Upper East Side, Klaus in Murray Hill, Judy from Long Island City. Hello, Klaus has been quite a few times. Amazing. Coming in quick now. Hello from Rego Park. Helen Harrison, guest curator of Dawn of a New Day at the Queen's Museum. Welcome, Helen. Amazing. We have Kyle and Michelle from New Jersey as well. Jane from Tulsa. Peter, native Upper West Sider. Panorama is my favorite place in New York City. Amazing. Matt from New Hampshire. It's on his list for a future visit to NYC. Fantastic. Hello, Jean from California, another native New Yorker. Amazing. Keep the greetings coming in the chat while I go over some housekeeping notes and introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, hello, I'm Nicole. I'm the editor and director of events at Untapped New York, so I get to plan all of the fun talks like this one for our members and the public. Once again, today, the topic at hand is the panorama of New York City, and we have Lynn Maliszewski with us from the Queen's Museum to tell us all about it. We are recording this talk, as you heard the robot say at the top. So if you have to leave early for any reason, or if you joined late, no worries. It will be sent out in an email to everyone who registered, and it will also go up on the on-demand archive on Untapped New York's website. That archive has over 300 past recorded webinars in it, and it is available to our Untapped New York members. So if you are not an Untapped New York member yet, join us. You'll get access to that video archive and at higher levels, access to in-person events as well. If you have any questions for Lynn as we go, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We love to hear your comments and your questions. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So let me tell you a little bit about Lynn. So Lynn is the Assistant Director of Archives and Collections at the Queen's Museum. She cares for and manages objects related to the 1939, 1940, and 1964-65 New York World's Fairs, the art collection, and institutional history. Before joining the museum, she was an Associate Director at the Calhoun Fine Arts in New York. She has worked in an archival capacity at Andrea Rosen Gallery, Primary Information and Printed Matter. She's an experienced editor who has written for Bomb and the Brooklyn Rail, among other publications, with an emphasis on artist books and archival projects. She received an MA from the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College in 2017, and we are very excited to have her here with us today to talk about her latest project on the panorama of the city of New York. So hello, Lynn.
Hi, Nicole, and hi, everyone. Thanks so much for hosting me today. I am so excited to really celebrate the Panorama of the City of New York book, which was just released in December of 2024. And yeah, we're gonna go through some really fun archival slides and images today, and also, of course, talk a bit more about the 1964 World's Fair as well, just since we're celebrating that anniversary as well here at the museum with a really incredible World's Fair exhibition as well. So tying that in naturally made sense. So let's kick it off.
Awesome.
So just to give you a kind of intro of where we're going today, we're going to have a little intro to the book. We're going to talk about the 64 World's Fair, as I mentioned, and specifically think about two pavilions that we're thinking about cities. We're going to talk about New York City as a protagonist at the 1964 World's Fair, and then, of course, talk about the panorama in 64 and then the panorama today as well. So just to get you started, I am giving you a little intro to the book, a little teaser. As I mentioned, it is available for sale and was published in December of last year with Scala Arts and Heritage Publishers. We have incredible graphic design by Miko McGinty Incorporated. And I really just have to thank, of course, Lauren Haynes and Maisha Hassan and Erin Barnett for their incredible editorial support, research support, general support. So you can see here, this is our list of the table of contents. We have an incredible essay by Kenneth T. Jackson, who's a super well-known New York City historian. Mark Miller shared with us a reprint of his essay that he wrote in 1990 for the original restoration that's occurred most recently, which is the form of the panorama that we see today from that restoration in 1992 to 1994. And then we have an incredible conversation with Valerie Paley, who's the librarian at the New York Historical Society, and Vijayanti Rao, who's an amazing anthropologist, sociologist, and general architecture fiend. So highly recommend reading all of these essays when you get the book. Just to give you another little kind of teaser, the book is really filled with incredible facts, and just the photos are extremely wide ranging. We have a ton of archival images, as well as some more contemporary images like this one from 2016 by Mark Tui. Here's another page of just really great content for you. The book is 160 pages, and I would say 2/3 of it is photos, so super fun. So I want to get right into the kind of first topic here, which is the 1964 New York World's Fair and cities. So we know New York City was the host city. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But the 64-65 World's Fair's theme was peace through understanding. And like a multitude of World's Fairs before and after this one, the focus was really on thinking about the future, thinking about ideas and progress and different innovations that both corporations, countries, and states wanted to share with the general public. So at the World's Fair, cities played a predominant role. I would say when you think about different cities that were shown through the state pavilions and the federal area, but then also in the international pavilion as well. So city living was really linked to these ideas of an empowered citizen, having new opportunities for travel and trade, understanding, communication, thinking about being at the center of culture, how cities are able to pack not only buildings and kind of people in together, but really become a nexus of different exchanges occurring on a cultural level. And then lastly, of course, the forefront of technology. This was something that was really commonly known with cities when you think about the different industries that were popping up in cities. Oh, I see we have a question, but we're going to wait until the end. So, Stephen, I'm going to put a pin in that until the end. So, the iconic city pavilion, of course, is Futurama, which was a portion of the General Motors pavilion. And the General Motors pavilion was in the transportation area. Transportation area just had a few pavilions, actually the fewest pavilions by number, but some would say the most memorable in both content and kind of legacy with the World's Fairs. So this very storied pavilion, of course, I want to throw it out to Helen and the other World's Fair nerds who will know that Futurama in the 64 Fair was actually the second incarnation of this exhibition and diorama. The first had actually come at the 1939-1940 World's Fair, wherein, again, General Motors presented an exhibition component called Futurama that actually predicted 1960. So when the opportunity came around to have another World's Fair in New York, it was only natural that General Motors wanted to kind of refresh and rejuvenate what their version of Futurama would be 4 years after the original Futurama predicted a number of technologies that actually came to be. So we also have another fun fact here that the builder of the Panorama, the primary model maker and his company, Raymond Lester of Lester and Associates, actually was a model maker for the Futurama display at the 1939 World's Fair and worked with Norman Bel Geddes on this incredible display. So just a fun thing. And, I put in this little note, which I recently discovered from actually an administrative document put out by General Motors in their description for internal stakeholders, what this Futurama portion of the pavilion was going to be. And they wrote that this philosophy was really what was leading this portion, that restricted mobility impedes progress and transportation innovation can actually lead to a multitude of new opportunities for humankind. So when we look at this city of tomorrow, and these photos, the prior as well as the one you're looking at right now, are archival photos of the actual Futurama city of tomorrow. So the city of tomorrow, what we can describe it as is a very large set, is what they called it, because it wasn't like the Panorama, this miniature model. It was actually quite a significant kind of escalation of building technology, of model making. So you had buildings in there, the tallest of which was 16 feet. And it actually took up a square footage of 13,000 feet. So that's even bigger than the Panorama itself. The Panorama is about 9,300 square feet. So you can tell just even more gigantic for this one section of the future. And Futurama really was, thinking about a multitude of different ways that progress through transportation and mobility could exist. So this was actually one of 7 areas that existed that they went into. They also looked at, over the course of this 15-minute ride, the jungle, outer space, the deep ice of Antarctica, the deep sea, and the jungle. So, the city in a way was the culmination of all of these different ideas that they patched together. So what you see here is a set, like I mentioned, that you as a viewer would be viewing from the perimeter. So you'd be sitting in a seat with speakers in your ears, and you would be kind of gliding along this track, watching this model unfold in front of you. And very much unlike the Panorama, there was a lot of animation to this model. The cars were moving, there were people walking, there were lights going on and off. So it really was an animation of what the city could be, for example. And the features of the city of tomorrow include those that I have listed here at right: an automated highway system. So that's what we're looking at right here to a degree: a city living center, a city freight center, city commercial center, transportation center, and then the city at night, which was kind of like a separate little area. And what you could have gotten out of the voiceover that was accompanying this vision really is that highways, which actually in the 39 version were referred to as motorways, are really the indicators of prosperity and progress, and that was the ultimate from the city to suburban areas to rural areas. So that was kind of proof that humanity was evolving to require and also sustain different resources in different environments. We also see that buildings are extremely tall. Not shocking to us right now, but it was a major thing in this display that airspace was not utilized to the full extent that it could be. So this was the big reason that there actually were buildings on top of highways, because they were really seeing that the only way to go was up at that point. And we often still talk about that, of course. I think there's an irony that there's no mention of how tall or the environment, the effects on the environment that building up and building down might have on a particular city or a particular block of land based on climate. There's also no mention of parking, which I find absolutely hilarious, because as we all know, this is something that is a very difficult resource to come by in certain moments, depending on the weekend, depending on the neighborhood. And then lastly, something that's really important too about this is that there's a real emphasis that there's no traffic, which is a very funny thing to say, but there's a continued emphasis on, everyone has planned and thought through efficiency principles to make sure that traffic is moving smoothly. And that is an undercurrent of the written material around the city of tomorrow, because really the goal is still, yes, to have mobility via cars, but to have also easy commerce, easy movement, and easy cultural kind of membranes that can be moved about in a very easy way. So here are some more images. This image on the right is, again, to give you a sense of scale, detail, and just the fact that this was actually something people built by hand. On the right, or excuse me, on the left, we see that night scene that I had mentioned before. And it's really interesting because the model of the city in 1964, in a way, despite the 25 years between the 39 fair, actually mirrors quite a bit of the thinking around this idea of a city center and then the city kind of being the center pollinating force of all of these different activities, but then you have everything else on the outside. You have the airports on the outside, you have homes on the outside. So you can see that reflected in the way that the lights are. And then you see in the distance another city off to the right of this image. So I just also want to say the model, the set itself had over 8,000 human figures, had 1,600 vehicles on it, half of which were moving. It was, like I said, 13,000 square feet, and it hosted about 70,000 people a day over the course of a 12-hour day, which is how long the fair was open, and it was a 15-minute ride. So just, millions of people saw this ride. I would say this was one that most people really pined for when they came to the fair, if it was for one day or for, a day a week, which of course a lot of people did as well. This is a brochure that was given by GM, and this was something, you could likely pick up on the way in or the way out. It just was a map of the grounds and showed you the way through the building. So this is also just to share with you that the World's Fair really, at the end of the day, served a multitude of purposes, right? It was a center of technology and a center of showing people maybe where the future could go, but it was also a real market. These corporations had an opportunity to reach more people than they ever perhaps had in one set of a few months. The fair was open from April to October for 1964 and 1965. And this was an opportunity to have people from all over the country, all over the world, really come and engage and feel mystified by your product. So a corporation like GM really took advantage of that because, as you can see, there's the reception hall. They have an indication of where you go to get to the Futurama ride, but they don't have a map of that because that's the special sauce of the pavilion, right? But then what you do see is this avenue of progress, which goes through contemporary research that GM is working on, from space age research to engineering. And then you get to what is a double-decker product plaza, as well as a product plaza outside the actual pavilion in the garden that shows you perhaps predictable cars, yes, a multitude of different models and styles, some futuristic, some more consumer oriented. But then on the lower product plaza, there are a number of different kind of commercial and military grade products. So you see something like United Delco or Detroit Diesel, which was all about developing engines, some for tanks that were literally used in World War II, some for trucks that brought products across the country. But you really see that there's this balance between imagination and really kind of hypnotizing people with the potential, but then also very tangibly selling them something. And that those two kind of goals and aspirations are oftentimes intertwined, sometimes very transparently, sometimes a little more subversively. And this was a really interesting quote, again, from a GM description of the Futurama ride, that they described that the proposals within Futurama are realistic and attainable with the technology that GM has developed to date. And they will become a reality when man decides his need for them surpasses his ability to do without them, which I just thought was interesting. It's, again, something specifically at this fair that we see many products actually that we have today that debuted at the fair or had some sort of mention at the fair, but then kind of disappeared within the realm of who knows what, corporate questions or more product testing, et cetera. So it's just an interesting kind of turning point in a way for a lot of these ideas. So the next in this consideration of the New York World's Fair and cities is a unique one. So the Berlin Pavilion, which was actually a privately sponsored pavilion, it was sponsored by a marketing agency because actually Berlin at that point was split into East and West Berlin. East Berlin was controlled by the GDR and was a Soviet satellite state, West Berlin was seen as, the more free and the more kind of West-leaning, Western Bloc portion of Germany. So thus, Germany could not participate in this technically because this was yet another complication of the 1964 World's Fair not technically being a World's Fair because it was not organized and sponsored by the Bureau of International Expositions, which has a rule that a World's Fair can only happen in a country once a decade. And there was actually a World's Fair in Seattle in 1962. So this World's Fair was fundamentally a private endeavor and an offshoot of the more official World's Fair. So thus, the Berlin Pavilion existed, but was very much a private endeavor, not unlike the Vatican, which was also at this fair. So the Berlin Pavilion stuck out to me in preparing this presentation to you all, because when we think about cities and we think about the panorama and we think about why that item was made, but also why it's still important and how it's evolved, it's interesting that there are very few cities that are included at the World's Fair. There's usually states or regions, like there's a New England pavilion, for example, a Caribbean pavilion. But to see a city, there are very few of them. It's pretty much New York City, Berlin. There was a Hollywood pavilion. Um, so I wanted to address this to kind of think through it with you all, and especially considering the moment that Berlin was in at that moment. The Berlin Wall had just gone up in 1961, and they're coming to this World's Fair that's in a way very bombastic and very, futuristic and utopian. And it's curious to think about, of course, how cities were represented and what that vision of a city could be based on what they had gone through. So in this brochure, which is a very, in a way, modest brochure that, again, likely was just something that you picked up when you first walked in. Interesting to compare it in design and kind of pomp to the GM brochure that we just saw a few slides ago. But what you see is a real acknowledgement that, yes, they want to show their science and technology. Yes, they want to show their industry and the ability for the economy to really pull them into the future. But they really want to also remind people that there's a humanity. So there's, this quote that's pulled directly from the brochure, that we must not forget man and his basic needs, his cherished hopes, and his eternal search for happiness. And there's, an emphasis in the actual makeup of the pavilion on comparing Berlin to New York City, on superimposing, a city street in Berlin to a New York City street using methods of photography and cinema of different films to really kind of bring people's imagination into the present and bring it down to the incredible German culture that has existed, over the 20th century, thinking about contributions to industries like publishing or manufacturing, with these incredible photos of factories and individuals making these beautiful things. And then there's also in this brochure, as you might be able to read, an explanation that was provided by the mayor of West Berlin, Willy Brandt. So giving people a kind of grounding moment as well, so that you kind of understood where maybe the language was coming from or where the vision of the culture was coming from. And I do want to note, because it was, again, very interesting to me, this is the brochure from 1965. So oftentimes there was this kind of revamp of materials and exhibitions between the 1964 and 65 seasons. And I didn't really want to bring up the other brochure, but in reading it, I can let you know that there were quite a few edits from the 64 to this 65 brochure. And the removals were perhaps the most dramatic to me. Phrases like a city ravaged by war when describing West Berlin, or, referring to moving beyond the idea that man is truly more important than dogma, and the conflict of even that statement being something that is in a 1964 World's Fair brochure. If anyone in this presentation has any artifacts, you go through them, you might be able to just immediately understand that it is so rare to see such negativity alongside anything related to the 1964 World's Fair. And they even in this last bullet, they had a section that was talking about today and yesterday of Berlin, of West Berlin, which, as you might be able to tell from this brochure, has been completely deleted as a section, where they literally reference that awful period of madness and destruction, of horror unleashed by a totalitarian regime. The acknowledgement to me was just very interesting to see that, here's a pavilion that's really looking at a city, and while they are forward thinking, they're also acknowledging that there is a depth of context and complication that you don't often see in a World's Fair. So it's just an interesting thing to kind of see that there are exceptions to the standard in a way. This was just a little bit of ephemera that was pulled from the Berlin Pavilion. This was a really incredible booklet that showed you, like I mentioned, all the different manufacturing. And I just think even looking at the language has a really different tone to it. Like we're looking at a city here that is being in a way very factual and very pragmatic and very modest. In this item to the left, they're telling a potential investor or a potential broker of a particular product that West Berlin, or excuse me, Berlin offers, loans, and they offer tax breaks. And, there's a way in which income tax can be discussed that remains flexible. So I think there's a real attempt to kind of massage people into coming by acknowledging that, you know, they need to kind of give and take a little bit. It's not just saying we are the best city, you need to come here, watch us, and join if you'd like. So this was just a very interesting kind of counter to me about thinking about cities at the World's Fair. So moving into the fun part, which is all the New York City stuff. So we have here a section that's really thinking about New York City as the protagonist in a way of the World's Fair. New York City, being the host city, really wanted to do an incredible job of pitching itself to the country as a gleaming example of what a city could be and what a city is. So these two images that I've kind of spliced together, this is one spread from a progress report, which was a series of booklets that the World's Fair Corporation published every 6 months leading up to the fair. They published 11 of them. And here you can see two things. I love the right-hand side of this where you see the kind of dot on New York City, or what we can assume to be New York City, with this amazing kind of boomerang effect, implying perhaps that the whole world is being wrapped up in this New York event or kind of being funneled into this New York event. And then on the left side, you see these incredible landmarks that we know so well, the United Nations, Rockefeller Center, the Empire State Building, alongside modes of transportation, thinking about the subway and the bridges and flights, into LaGuardia Airport, which was the international airport, which was still extremely rare at that point in domestic travel. So having all of these literal landmarks be alongside travel and thinking about how important access was proves in a way that there's a real alias, or not alias, there's a real kind of icon that arises that is New York City in talking about the World's Fair. So here we have a few incredible pieces of ephemera from our own collection. We have this map on the left, which, I love the text in a way that at the top right says all roads lead to the fair. And this is showing you all the different networks, all the different highways. There's even fireworks that are coming off of the Unisphere to really get you excited. So this again is a super common strategy that we see for the New York World's Fair in 1964, that, a map is a marketing tool, is, a poster, is a memory and a souvenir. It serves as all of these different purposes because ultimately the access and the desire to kind of pull as many people in as possible was the point of having the fair in New York City. These two documents in the middle and then on the right-hand side also show you that the city really embraced the World's Fair. There were entire marketing campaigns put up by Macy's and Dillard's. There were billboards. There were these incredible brochures that you could get either mailed to you or likely pick up at a supermarket that shared with you all the different children's activities or museum shows or plays and performances that were happening in the city, specifically around the time that the New York World's Fair was in town. So there's a real embrace of the kind of ability to pull people to the city that everyone was cashing in on, of course. But it really, in a way, allowed New York City to be this kind of grander idea that people were also so intrigued to see and so excited to see, and actually led them to the World's Fair. So this is another set of extremely fun. I love the ephemera. I love the printed matter that comes out of the World's Fair because we see two brochures here that were produced and distributed by the World's Fair Corporation. Again, geniuses of marketing. So on the left, you have a little 4-page booklet called The Economic Benefits of the New York World's Fair. This was put out in 1961. Very comically, you can even see that the Unisphere logo for the World's Fair actually changed over the course of the development of the fair. So this is a kind of earlier version of the logo that we know evolves into a bit of a more kind of modest or edited version, with the rings being a bit tighter to the Unisphere and there being a different distribution of color. But this booklet goes into just very plain, simple English. Why are we having this fair here? Who is funding the fair? And what have people said about it? And why do we care about that? So the things that I really enjoyed about this is that, the New York World's Fair was, like I said, a private endeavor. So Robert Moses and his team had to fundraise. We had, the federal government involved. President Eisenhower and President Kennedy both endorsed this and gave a multitude of federal bonds. Nelson Rockefeller, Robert Wagner, mayor of New York City, all gave their sign off for the sake that business, industry, and labor would be affected positively by this. And then on the right, you see that we have this other pamphlet that was based on a speech that Robert Moses gave to students at Brandeis University. And in that, he goes into, I mean, it's a very drawn out kind of contorted speech in a way about the legacy of World's Fairs and thinking about how other World's Fairs did it wrong because they were so strict, and we're doing it in a way that is imaginative and is more open-ended and really encourages people to kind of think of the best and think of how far they can push human evolution, their corporate endeavors, their innovation technology, et cetera. But what he does divulge in this speech is that approximately $1 billion have been raised in 1963 for the fair, and that includes money to create highways and different arteries. We know those arteries were not subways, don't get me wrong, but arteries for cars to get to the fair. We know that it was incredible timing, and this was also Moses's doing, that Lincoln Center was opening right around the time that the fair was going to be in its prime as well. So Lincoln Center started opening in 62, but the buildings kept unfolding through 1966. So there was a partnership there with Lincoln Center about, offering tickets and opportunities to see performances. There's a really great line that Moses says in this speech, which is, "We don't have to interpret New York to New Yorkers," which in a way I take to mean he kind of wasn't obviously trying to say anything about New York, or on the face that seems to be what it is, but we know Robert Moses was always trying to say things about New York and always trying to kind of prove what he had done to the city and how much more needed to be done to make it mobile in his eyes. And then lastly, which is one of kind of the last lines of this essay or speech rather, is that the fair offers a healthy rivalry in all peaceful fields of human endeavor under simple ground rules. What those ground rules are, he does not say. But I think when it comes to thinking of New York City and the panorama, there's a way in which there was an interest in proving and offering a kind of horse in the race around why New York City was important, why it was significant, why it was a model of a city that should and could be replicated. And we see that in a way throughout the interpretation and the kind of use of the panorama. But we'll get to that in one moment. So that brings us to the actual World's Fair. These are two photos which I found which comically look to be literally taken right after each other. On the left, the Queen's Museum is that building right in the center. You're seeing it from the side. And then in this photo on the right, you'll see it at the very left edge of the image. But as you can see, the New York City building, as it was known then, is directly behind the Unisphere. To the left, so this kind of like rectangular looking building with all the windows that almost look like screens, that's the federal building. So the United States of America Pavilion, fundamentally. And then just to the right with all these little squares with pointy tops is the New Jersey Pavilion. So you really have, even in the makeup of the fair and how the pavilions were organized, New York City is at the center and it's reflecting the world, which is the Unisphere. And then it's kind of supplanted by the tri-state area to the right, and then literally the federal government, so the entirety of America to its left, at least as far as we're orienting ourselves by these photos. So again, I think just the implication of the importance of New York City when it comes to also, not only domestic endeavors, but also how it stands in the tri-state area and the importance of it in communication with the world, I think is pretty potent in this composition here. So when you got inside the New York City building, you were brought into the Panorama ride. But if you went upstairs, you could go upstairs or you would be up there at the end of the ride, you would see this incredible display of a multitude of both artifacts and contemporary information. And one of the major parts of this was actually a museum display wherein over 15 institutions were invited to present either one item or up to 3 items that they thought really signified either the art of their collection or the art of the moment. There were some displays that offered more kind of thematic explorations, I would say. So some institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art had sections where they could participate a little bit more. But you really, again, had this connection to what are the New York City institutions? What is the beauty of living in New York City? What does New York City have to offer? And moving forward, we see a few of these. So on the right, you see a Metropolitan Museum of Art display, which is all about the figure over 5,000 years of art history. So, a really beautiful display that I'm sure someone coming to New York would have been wowed by. This was also a super common method in the different pavilions where you would have, incredible art. You would have Sanskrit tableaus. You would have, literally the Pietà from Vatican City, or these other kind of artistic and cultural milestones that people could see in one place. And then on the left side, you had a display that showed the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority facilities. So the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority was yet another government post that Robert Moses held for quite some time. And of course, he was also very proud of the work that he did there. So this was really an opportunity for people to, again, connect New York City and connect the varied parts of New York City infrastructure to why it's an incredible city and to really see the kind of multitude of ways that city infrastructure existed. It was also very entertaining for World's Fair goers at the time because the Verrazano Bridge opened in November of 1964. So outside of the New York City building, there was actually a steel cable from the Verrazano Bridge of the same type and the same model and make. And, it's just otherworldly to be standing next to this thing that's traversing a body of water and connecting two boroughs in a way that has never been done before. So must have been pretty impactful. And then you also had these other sections. Again, the Bronx Zoo here on the right had a little bit of a display. And then on the left, I'm so curious about what is just beyond the camera's view in this display, but you have what looks like a little nighttime scene, a little bit of a set perhaps to walk through and kind of just pretend you're in the East Village or Midtown, and maybe get more of the sights and the sounds and the sensations of that. So then moving on to the Panorama. So the Panorama was really the main event at the New York City building. On your left here in this slide, we see a poster that is advertising the Panorama, and its glorious indoor helicopter ride, which is the primary way that you would have seen the panorama for the majority of its life, actually. So looking at this split, and also just exciting, both of these images are reproduced in the book, so you can see them every day of your life if you'd like to. But we have a really beautiful split of what would have been your experience of the fair. So in this little bottom register, you see a man with a top hat, and he is in the helicopter car, which goes around the perimeter. And then on the top, there is a glass window that you would have looked down onto the panorama from. But, you know, again, the fun thing is it was completely encased because there was a bit more of an experience that was planned for the panorama in comparison to how it is right now. So on the left here, you have another preparatory drawing of the panorama kind of entryway, which includes this beautiful Castello plan model. So this model was borrowed from the Museum of the City of New York and installed to really give you a different sense of scale and a different sense of time. So the Castello plan shows what was Manhattan and really just downtown Manhattan in 1664. And the scale of it is 1 to 600. So it's a half scale of what the panorama is, which is 1 to 1200. So pretty much you would have walked in and marveled at, you know, the early days of New York and thought about it and considered what you see on your day to day. And then you would have walked into one of these helicopter cars, close the door behind you. And I have a very exciting treat. You would have gone through and begun to see what is the panorama in front of you. So this is a view from inside the panorama when it was completed, and you see that there's little helicopter cars lit up at the closest bottom row, and then you can see the glass at the top row. And then on the left is a floor plan. So just to show you, you know, the carts actually started over here in Staten Island, and then you would go over here and go up, boop, boop, and then be let out up here. So we are going to watch a video actually next, which is a recently digitized item that's called The Last Ride on the Helicopter Ride. And it's a video spot that they did in the late 80s, early 90s before we took out the helicopter car. So I just thought this would be a treat. And it actually also does run with the voiceover that was included in the 1964-65 ride. So just another conversation to be had here about cities. Okay, I'm just going to play this.
About 3 years, the new spiral ramp will be completed, and the public will be able to see the panorama from as close as 3 feet. This winter, as a necessary first step, the old panorama ride will be removed. With it, another bit of World's Fair history will fade. But before it goes, join us for a final ride, seeing the panorama as you would have at the 1964-1965 World's Fair, and hearing the original narration by Lowell Thomas.
Let's sail with the early explorers, sail into the harbor with Verrazzano, the place marked by that bridge, world's longest suspension span, connecting Staten Island with Brooklyn. This is Staten Island, named by Henry Hudson, later known as the borough of Richmond, third largest, most rural, and least developed. Against a deadline set by the Duke of York, Captain Christopher Billop raced his sailing ship around this island in less than 1 day, and thereby won Staten Island for the state of New York. It was here at the very house Billop built that on September 11, 1776, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams met with British General Howe in an attempt to peacefully settle the American Revolution. Staten Island, where Jenny Lind, Adelina Patti, and the great Italian emancipator Giuseppe Garibaldi each made his home. Where you can find the oldest elementary school building in America. Where you can climb to the highest point on the Atlantic coast from Maine to Florida, Todd Hill. And here just below you, the Gathos Bridge to Jersey, once the world's longest suspension. From its growing industrial area, manufactured goods move by ship along miles of docks or by truck across the Bayonne Bridge, the longest arch in the world. Now glance across the harbor, the borough of homes and churches of more than 2.5 million people. That's Brooklyn. Everyone has lived here, from Henry Ward Beecher to Mae West, from Walt Whitman to Arthur Miller, and to Eamon de Valera. From its terminals and waterfront, 1/4 of all New York's goods are shipped. Recognize the lady below? Ah, yes, she's France's gift to the USA, Miss Liberty. Gateway to America, to opportunity, to New York. From Indian trading post 300 years ago to financial capital of the world. In 1784, a young nation's first capital, as George Washington is inaugurated. And an Indian trail, Broadway, carries the city north past the 102 floors of the Empire State Building, world's tallest, past more than 100 skyscrapers over 30 stories tall, past the 840 green acres of Central Park, past Columbia University, New York's oldest college, past a former district of quiet farms called Harlem, past the stunning George Washington Bridge, 4th longest suspension span in the world, to the art treasures of the cloisters. Manhattan, 12.5 miles of incredible achievement. Quite a bargain for only $24. Cross Spite and Dival and you land in the Bronx, only borough on the mainland. And how much did the Bronx cost? Well, its first settler, Jonas Bronk, a Dane, bought it from the Indians for 2 guns, 2 kettles, a barrel of cider, and 6 bits of money. Little did they realize that the Bronx one day would wind up with the New York Yankees. The Bronx, whose Gouverneur Morris first drafted the Constitution of the United States, where Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Raven and Annabel Lee, whose Woodlawn Cemetery is the last resting place of Admiral Farragut, Ralph Pulitzer, Jay Gould, and F.W. Woolworth, Herman Melville of Moby Dick fame. The borough of universities, Fordham, Hunter, Manhattan, NYU, the world-famous Bronx Zoo and Botanical Gardens, unrivaled collections of plants and animals, almost 1,000 acres of them. Now to cross the East River, let's take 2 of the world's most beautiful bridges, the Whitestone and the Frog's Neck, and arrive in the largest and fastest growing borough of all, Queens, home of the New York Mets at Shea Stadium, Olympic tennis courts at Forest Hills, center of aviation, LaGuardia Field, and the world's largest airport, Kennedy International. New York, 300 years ago, a small trading post on the tip of Manhattan. In 1898, 5 boroughs joined together to create a city. Today, center of civilization. This electric metropolis has opened opportunity to all, and its reward has been greatness.
Oh, love that video. Um,
About
so,
3 years, the new
pardon me. Um, so, tough to beat that incredible view. But I want to bring us into a little bit, again, more of the archival material, because I think what is eternally stunning to me about the Panorama is that we have an experience now that is very different than the experience that was had in 1964. And I'm eternally trying to put myself in the shoes of one of you incredible attendees who might have attended the fair and ridden in that helicopter ride, or an adult who was also riding it for the first time, and perhaps seeing a city truly from a perspective they had never seen before. So when we think about the panorama, we have to go way, way, way back to the fact that this is literally a handmade item. It's an item that took 3 years, over 100 people in all capacities to make. And what we're looking at right here is images that were donated from Lester Associates, the model maker who made the original model and then also did the renovation in 1992. This is where the model starts. So we think of literally planks of wood, and we think of a urethane foam being blasted over it and then being sanded by hand with both a belt sander and then a more fine kind of like hand sander, and literal maps and roads and blocks being drawn on by hand. Looking at photographs, looking at a multitude of different resources, from Sanborn maps, which are an insurance map often used for fire departments and fire safety, but then also maps that had been sourced from varied departments around New York City and even from the state in certain cases. So we see that the reality of the panorama being so incredible, and you even get it from that video, is that air travel at that moment was still extremely rare. So you were actually seeing a view of the city and understanding a relationship between the boroughs, and a relationship between density in certain areas and height in other areas that you might not have necessarily been able to get at that moment in time unless you were extremely well suited to riding the subway frequently and could make the time to check out every borough every so often and were into walking around. There's a lot of circumstances that would have caused someone to literally not know much beyond their neighborhood, quite honestly. So this was an opportunity to begin to think relationally, and the panorama had a 1% margin of error. So it was literally really, really, really accurate. And you had an incredible system for the topography and understanding the actual buildings alongside the environment. So here's some more detailed shots of how the panorama was made. We see at the left two workers that are consulting a particular roadway, and it looks like looking at both these templates that they have in front of them and maybe trying to just make sure that the lines match up, because what happened was there were the maps and both oblique photographs, as they're called, which are photos taken from the street, and then aerial photographs, because Lester took three plane rides over the entire city to take perfectly straight down aerial photos that he could then print in a very large size so that his technicians could have a real understanding of the drawn maps from the city or from the Sanborn maps matching up with the actual depiction of the city as it was at that moment. And so we see someone placing the buildings on the map at the right as well from these templates. And it's really interesting to just know that, these buildings were glued down to the map, but it wasn't a super glue, it wasn't a gorilla glue, because ultimately this model was really meant to be a city planning tool, as well as an educational tool for, visitors to New York City, school children, et cetera. But the vision was that portions of the panorama could be taken out and brought to City Hall, or even worked on within the space, because after the fair, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority actually was the owner and maintainer of the panorama until the Queens Museum was inaugurated in 1972. So the goal was really to have this be a model that could even actively anticipate the evolution of the city. Perhaps an architect or a city planner could provide plans for a new building to be made 6 months in advance of it being completed, and the model could be updated accordingly. So that ultimately is not how we've ended up maintaining or using the model, but we do use it for extreme educational and also exhibitionary kind of supplements, I would say, and tools. So we'll talk about that also momentarily. So here's another image of some of these close-up elements of the panorama. So on the left, you see two templates that were kind of samples that were provided to the museum by Lester Associates. And you see on here that there are different colored buildings and then also different sized buildings. And the important thing to know about the panorama and what it is once you get down on the street level is that for all of its incredible accuracy from afar and even like up close when you think about what the buildings are and what their purpose is, it's extremely abstract other than in Midtown when you get down on the street level with it, because the goal again for it being a city planning tool and for the city being a majority of residential homes or commercial manufacturing buildings, all of these buildings are not unique. There's a standard of certain types of buildings are certain types of colors and certain levels of buildings. So like a 4 to 8 story brownstone, for example, is one particular type of piece, but you won't find a difference between a 4-story and a 6-story. They're just the same piece because it's almost a mathematical equation. And these types of forms and standardizations actually make up 3/4 of the panorama. When we really look at it and quantify it, there's about 100,000 one-of-a-kind unique buildings, the majority of which are in Midtown. And then beyond that, there's about 150 buildings that are not quite unique with a degree of fenestration or UV paint, which some of the buildings in Midtown have, which you can even see in the buildings surrounding St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is what's on the right here. But for example, St. Patrick's Cathedral is a cathedral form, of which there are a number of them. So the forms are extremely similar and made in this way because there's a real emphasis again on efficiency and having this model be functional, at least when it was originally being made. So now we get to the panorama today, and this is our beautiful Empire State Building. So I want to kind of back up only a tiny bit to the last major moment of renovation of the panorama, because this question always arises. Is the panorama up to date? Why isn't it up to date? How long has it been since you've updated it? So I can answer that all right now. We had an incredible curator who's actually in the red sweater in this photo, Mr. Mark Miller, who worked at the museum for a little over 5 years. And he really was an incredible steward of both the World's Fair collection and the communities surrounding the World's Fair, but also of the panorama. And he really was the one who pushed to have an update at the 30-year anniversary of the World's Fair, and made this incredible exhibition called Making of the Panorama, which actually displayed a piece of the panorama in Far Rockaway that didn't fit into the original model because they built the room slightly too small due to poor planning about the helicopter track for the helicopter ride. And he displayed incredible Sanborn maps. The photo you see is one of these aerial photos that Raymond Lester took to make the model, and a number of other archival items related, including spare pieces and different kind of model making injection molds that were a part of the process of making the panorama. And what you see on the right is an image of the panorama in and around that period, 88, 89. So you see that, it looks incredible. The profile is very low, right? Because you're thinking about 1960s New York. The real airspace development was really only in Manhattan, and there's an incredible amount of residential and commercial buildings that are uniform when it comes to that abstraction I was telling you about. And then on this top level, just below the light starbursts, you can still see that glass that was the only way that you could view the panorama for years, because the helicopter ride actually went out of commission technically in like the late 70s, early 80s, although sometimes it was activated, I hear, on randomized occasions or for special events. But the ride was ultimately taken out during the 1992 to 1994 renovation of the panorama, which was the only time that the model in its entirety has been cut up and removed to be updated in its entirety. And prior to that, there were a few kind of spot treatments to it, I would say. And around this making of the Panorama exhibition, Mr. Miller actually did an incredible campaign to invite different architects to have their in-house model makers create significant buildings with their own model makers at the appropriate scale. So you think of, the Lipstick Building, the Time Inc. Building, all of these exist on the model today in those more unique model made, in those more unique, from those more unique artisans, but they are at the scale. So they decided to keep them on from the 1992 to 1994 renovation. Another extremely big deal about the 1992-94 renovation is that for the first time, visitors to the Panorama could be in the same room as the Panorama. And what we did at that moment is work on making what we call the Crystal Walkway. And the Crystal Walkway mimics the route that the helicopter ride would have taken, granted on a bit more of a slower incline, but you start at about 3,000 feet sea level. That's what the walk recreates, what you would see New York from, close to Manhattan. So when you're looking at this slide here on the left, the lowest point on the ramp is 3,000 feet. It's meant to summon that elevation in a helicopter. And then as you go up, when you get to the tippy top in the left photo, you're viewing the city from about 20,000 feet of elevation. So you see here at night, there's also an incredible lighting system, which we are currently working on modernizing and renovating through a grant that we received, which I pray will remain a granting body. And on the right, we have an image of the ramp and the Panorama in the daytime cycle. So you can see it's extremely impactful to be able to, lean over the edge and point at your apartment, or, be able to follow Coney Island with your finger and not have to kind of be squishing your face up against a glass or a piece of plastic in a helicopter car. So it's very fun. And I just wanted to show you quickly, the Panorama with this crystal walkway and having walls that actually are immediately visible when you are looking at the Panorama allows us to do really incredible things relationally with contemporary art and with people who are thinking about New York City. And, you have such an incredible opportunity to really, again, sit with the city and understand relationships and distance and, pockets of different types of buildings or pockets of different types of activities by looking at this model. So I brought up a few exhibitions that we've done recently just to kind of get your mind thinking about what the Panorama is used for today and the different ways we use it. So this exhibition was from 2014 by an artist named Akra Shep. And Shep is intent on photographing with his large format camera all 40 islands that are technically a part of New York City. So I love this show. I was not here when this show was put up, but I think it's so interesting because looking at the Panorama, everyone thinks about New York City as the landmass or the center of culture or, industry and et cetera. But New York City is also completely surrounded and reliant upon water. Water was such an important part of New York City and Manhattan even existing. It's one of the best natural harbors in the world. And that's how this city was built over time, by the water. And what Accra has done here is force us to look out from a point of land into the water to kind of immerse ourselves in that. So, that's just an incredible relationship, I think, that's being made and really does something different to your brain in being in the room with the Panorama. We have this incredible exhibition from 2017 and 18 called Never Built New York, which was an exhibition that was done in communication with a multitude of hypothetical architectural plans that were created. Some that were very much, spitting and spinning in the imagination, others that were on the brink of actually being created. For example, the the Lower Manhattan Highway that Robert Moses proposed, There's some Trump TV towers that were proposed on the west side that never ultimately happened. So we use the panorama to literally visualize and narrate what these buildings were, what the ideas were, why they were rejected or why they were not possible or why they remain in the imagination, for example, as opposed to becoming a part of our reality. So another incredible way to use this model to really think about kind of past, present, and future, and then concepts around the city as well. Lastly, this is a recent one, which I was actually here for, and it was mind blowing. This is an artist named Stephanie Dinkins, and Stephanie works a lot with AR and a lot with AR and virtual reality. And what she did with the panorama is create a virtual reality experience, which you could put on goggles and see up where you see these spotlights on the crystal walkway. Or if you were just in the panorama, there were several moments where motion would activate a dimming of the lights and an activation of these characters who were these women, fictional women, but also kind of based in Stephanie's life or based in narratives of her family. And most of them were related to sites in New York City, to Staten Island or to Harlem or downtown in the World Trade Center. And those areas on the map would light up as you heard a voiceover and a story going while you were in the room. And they were short, they were about 60 to 90 seconds. So if you were in the panorama and really wanted to be obsessing over your neighborhood, the lights would ultimately come on. But it was a really, I think, innovative way to kind of interject on that experience and also give visitors something that they weren't expecting. So I loved this project. And then lastly, of course, very important and great timing, but we have a Panorama program coming up this weekend, which is going to be a really incredible conversation with Michael Mischione and Kenneth Jackson, the historian who also contributed to the Panorama book. It's on Saturday, March 29th from 3 to 4:30. And we will be talking about the 1811 Commissioner's Plan, also known as the Grid Plan, which was the plan to grid New York City from Houston Street to 155th Street. And we'll also be talking about the consolidation of the boroughs, which occurred in 1898. And before that, each borough was a separate kind of township and occupied its own set of rules and governance, et cetera. So we'll be talking about that with the two of them. And then we'll also be, which just opened this past weekend, but it's a great moment to see it. We have some film footage that Michael actually donated that goes through the renovation of the Panorama in 1992 and is really footage that no one had ever seen before, myself included. So we have a really great installation where you can sit and watch that film. So I absolutely invite you all to come. The RSVPs might be closed, but if you show up, we will not turn you away. So just throwing that out there for you. And that's all. I just really appreciate you all sticking with me for this and coming out tonight on your Wednesday evening to chat about the panorama. I'm excited to have some questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lynn. Yeah, and as she mentioned, if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. I know there are some already in the Q&A. I dropped links in the chat to grab a copy of the book. I don't have my copy at hand because I'm moving and it is packed in a box somewhere, but it is a stunning book with so many more amazing images like the one she showed. So definitely grab a copy. Check out the link to visit the Queen's Museum as well, including that new exhibit and all those great events. And also another way to see the panorama is on Untapped New York's World's Fair Tour. We are having one this weekend and we end at the Queen's Museum at the Panorama. And if you are an Untapped New York member, you get 50% off tickets to those tours. So just a little plug for those. It was so fun to see everyone's memories of the World's Fair in the chat. Morbo says the fair was the highlight of his life and it's all been downhill from there. Diane says the helicopters were a great place to make out. Barbara lost her first pocketbook in the helicopter, but got it back in the Lost and Found. And we have a Robin Roth Moyse, who is the daughter of the architect Richard Roth Jr. of Emery Roth and Sons, who donated models during one of the renovations, and Emery Roth and Sons also designed the Caribbean Pavilion. So lots of personal connections to the World's Fair. We had one question come in from Helen, who was curious to know, are the Twin Towers still there? She remembers when they were draped in black.
Yeah, so they are still on the model. And yeah, nothing has been added or taken away in that area, in that complex, in the World Trade Center complex.
Another question just came in from Robert Moorback. Terrific presentation. He says, what happened to the helicopters?
So funny you should ask. So the helicopters, as far as I know, all except for one that we have all been dispersed. If anyone has another one, I would love to know where it is, but we truly have one that we are actually working on conserving so that it can be something that people actually sit in and perhaps, watch a film like the one we just saw or listen to a recording. Because yeah, just to be able to actually kind of have that moment of sitting in the place where so many people have sat, I think is also really incredible for what it's worth. So yeah, stay tuned. We are working on it. I'm working on it, and I would, yeah, love to have it out for everyone to see.
That's very exciting news. We had a couple questions come in from Stephen. His first question was, whose idea was it to create the panorama for 1964? And I believe you spoke about that earlier, but if you could touch on it again.
Yeah, definitely. So it was Robert Moses's idea to create it. So again, it's this footage that we have that's on display right now about the renovation in 92 is an amazing piece of footage because it has interviews with the president of Lester Associates and then the vice president, who both worked on the original 64 model. And the vice president goes through kind of why Robert Moses asked to build this. And Robert Moses also worked as he worked as a commissioner of the parks in New York State as well. So and don't quote me on that exact title, but he did work in New York State parks as well as New York City parks. He was the commissioner of the New York City Parks Department, but then had a lot of hands in other parks and other developments. So he did the Niagara Falls complex and actually worked with Lester Associates to build a model for that. And they built a model that was so impressive to him that about 8 years later, when the World's Fair came up, he was like, "Ooh, we should do this." And even Lester at that moment kind of was a bit flabbergasted because the degree and the scale and the quantity of buildings and just the size of the five boroughs, of course, as we know, is awe-inspiring and otherworldly. But yeah, they definitely thus had to really think about a standardization method and workflow to get it moving.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting too. In one of the essays in the book, they point out that Moses's projects are really highlighted in the panorama. Like the parks are the pieces that glow, and the bridges are the only pieces that are made of metal.
Yep, exactly. And the bridges are a teeny bit bigger than the scale of the rest of the model, so that they have that kind of gravitas. I mean, it's a joke that Robert Moses hated tunnels because you can't see them. So that's why there are so many bridges. That
People
was his
nice
thing.
big bridges.
Mhm.
Um, and then Stephen had another question that I kind of want to expand on. He asks, how much would it cost to bring the panorama up to date? But I know there is a fun kind of crowdsource fundraising method that the museum has in the Adopt a Building program. If you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, it's really interesting the cost of updating it, right? Because I mean, there was talk of this in the chat that I just went through super quickly, but there are whole elements of New York City that exist now that are just not even present in any way, shape, or form. Hudson Yards, Long Island City, the Brooklyn Navy Yards, even, downtown Manhattan with the amount of skyscrapers, the Lower East Side, even Flushing, the amount of skyscrapers and larger buildings here, pretty much on the model, all you see in Long Island City is the Citigroup building. That's the one skyscraper. So obviously, at least for those New Yorkers, like, we know what that waterfront looks like now, and it is very tall and glass ridden. And when the update happened from 1964 to in 1992, when that update happened, they added about 30,000 buildings, and that update cost in today's money about $2 million. So my guess would be at least 3 to 4 times that, because you really have to consider all of these custom buildings that are just ever present in a way, thinking of like the vessel, for example, or buildings like that. And we do have a really incredible fundraising platform called Adopt a Building, wherein you can rent a property annually. So, there are different costs. It starts at $150 per year, but you can rent your apartment that you lived in when you were 22, or you can, rent the house your mom grew up in, or your favorite bodega, or, your favorite restaurant, all of these things. And it's really exciting because we give you a little certificate of ownership, and you can actually write to us with your memory and kind of why that place is important to you. So we're also kind of aggregating all of these memories and all of these really place-making points, and would hope at some point to either make that available just as an archival kind of like collection item that people can read, or have it, maybe as a social media situation, but that's down the line. But yeah, it's really incredible because we've done it for a little over 10 years now, and just such a variety of memories and kind of historical timelines that exist. So I highly recommend helping us preserve this incredible model.
Yeah, it's a great gift idea. A question from Michael: is there still trivia at the Panorama?
Yes. So the Panorama Challenge happens annually. We took a little break during COVID, and then last year was our first year back, and we're actually working on it for this year. So the date is forthcoming, and you can check our website in the next few weeks probably to get that detail.
Very fun. We had one final question come in from Peter. He was asking about the Never Built exhibit. I don't know if you want to pull up that picture again. He has a very specific question. In
Yeah,
the
about
right
the Trump. Yeah.
image,
Yes.
yeah, is that
I can tell you
flowers in
that
the
those
center, the Trump
were,
antennas?
yeah, they were in the exhibition. Here, let me just share my screen. Oops, sorry about that.
No problem. Well, we answered his question. Yes, that's
Yeah,
what
I can
happened.
tell you they were. Yeah, they really went above and beyond. And I would say for the Never Built New York, the structures that were included range all the way back to the kind of beginning of the 20th century. So yeah, all the TB towers were a part of it.
Very fun. And I know Robin will be happy if I share these pictures that she sent, which are her dad and relatives with their Emery Roth and Sons buildings the models that they donated
Yes,
to the
we
Panorama.
we have the photo on the right in our collection. So yes, I was looking. I saw this photo in the last 2 days as I was looking through these. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. They have an incredible catalog of architectural marvels that they created. So it's really amazing.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you once again so much, Lynn, for sharing all this great information and amazing photos with us. Again, I encourage everyone to grab a copy of the book. It has so many great images and information in there. Visit the Queen's Museum, whether on our tour or on your own, and become an Untapped New York member to get access to more virtual and in-person events like this one. We have another talk tomorrow, actually, where we'll be talking about Greenwood Cemetery and all kinds of fun events coming up for the spring. So thank you everyone for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great evening.